In 2021, South Korea made one of the most ambitious promises in its modern history. It pledged to reach carbon neutrality by 2050 and to cut greenhouse gas emissions by 40% below 2018 levels by the end of this decade. That put Korea alongside the EU, the United States, and Japan in the front rank of climate commitments. But here is the question that keeps energy analysts up at night. How does a country that still generates roughly a third of its electricity from coal and has been building new coal plants within the last 5 years actually get there? That gap between the pledge and the power grid is what this episode is about. Consider the scale of the problem. According to the International Energy Agency, South Korea was the world's 7th largest coal importer as recently as 2022. Coal accounted for around 32% of the country's electricity generation that same year. Korea's total greenhouse gas emissions in 2018, the baseline year for its own targets, were about 727 million tons of carbon dioxide equivalent, according to Statistics Korea and the Greenhouse Gas Inventory and Research Center. The revised nationally determined contribution, submitted under the Paris Agreement, commits Korea to getting that number down to 436 million tons by 2030. That is a reduction of roughly 290 million tons in under a decade. For context, the entire annual emissions of a mid-sized European country would need to vanish from Korea's ledger, every single year accumulating. And yet, as of 2022, Korea's emissions had declined only modestly from the 2018 peak. To understand why Korea is so dependent on coal, you have to go back to its industrialization. Through the 1980s and 90s, Korea built one of the world's densest concentrations of energy-hungry heavy industry: steel, petrochemicals, semiconductors, shipbuilding. The Korea Energy Economics Institute has documented how the country systematically expanded coal capacity to feed that growth cheaply and reliably. Natural gas was available but expensive. Renewables were immature. Nuclear was politically contentious after regional opposition movements gained strength in the 2000s. So coal became the backbone. When the 2011 Fukushima disaster prompted Korea to briefly slow nuclear expansion, utilities leaned even harder on coal. New coal plants approved in the early 2010s were still coming online as late as 2022. The result is a grid that is structurally locked into coal for baseload power, meaning the plants that run continuously to keep the lights on. Switching that out requires not just political will, but a near-total rebuild of the generation infrastructure. The cost of that structural dependency is now arriving on multiple fronts. South Korea consistently ranks among the OECD's worst performers on air quality. The Korea Environment Institute has linked fine particulate pollution, much of it traced to coal combustion combined with transboundary pollution, to tens of thousands of premature deaths annually. On the economic side, the energy transition carries its own price tag. The government's carbon neutral plan, released in 2021, projected that retiring coal and scaling renewables would require investment in the hundreds of billions of dollars over the coming decades. Meanwhile, international pressure is intensifying. Korea's major export customers in the EU are rolling out the Carbon Border Adjustment Mechanism, a carbon tariff that will penalize goods made with high-emission energy. For a country whose economy runs on exports, that is not an abstract policy debate. It is a direct threat to the competitiveness of Korean steel, chemicals, and manufactured goods. The clock is ticking from two directions at once. Korea's carbon story is not uniquely Korean. It is the story of every advanced industrial economy that built its prosperity on cheap fossil energy and now faces the bill. The lesson is not that the pledge was dishonest. Most climate researchers treat Korea's 2050 target as genuine policy. The lesson is about the difference between a declaration and a transition. Declarations are written in a day. Transitions take decades and cost real money, displace real workers, and threaten real industries. What Korea is navigating, the tension between an energy-hungry export economy, domestic political resistance, and a genuine climate commitment, is a version of the same dilemma playing out in Germany, Japan, and Australia. The country that figures out how to thread that needle without wrecking its economy will have written a playbook the whole world can use. Whether Korea will be that country is still genuinely an open question.